There was a smell of burning. The whole city was burning. Bombs exploding, battered dead bodies were thrown around. It was a meat grinder.
I can't help but remember. Sometimes I have dreams. Sometimes I just remember my comrades. The ones living and the ones who are not.
It's hard to think about, even now. When I remember, I can't bear it.
By 42, the Germans were advancing towards Stalingrad. The Germans moved their main units from all fronts to our area. Why? Because Stalingrad was to determine the outcome of the war. If the Germans were to make it across the Volga, they would have advanced to the Caucasus, occupying the oil fields. Russia would have perished.
Stalingrad would be the deciding point for the whole Soviet Union. Stalingrad had to be kept at all costs.
We were a huge unit, a whole army of 250,000 Germans that was suddenly sent to take Stalingrad.
We had fought very hard all the way to Kiev. And by 1942, we were ready to fight again.
As we advanced to defend Stalingrad, the infantry went first. We followed them, pulling the artillery. I'd never ridden a horse before, but eventually I rode very well. I wasn't the type that searched about for an ignition key. When our unit made it to the city, there was absolute quiet. The Germans hadn't yet reached the city.
I was scared when I arrived at Stalingrad. I joined the war straight off the school bench. I had no idea what I was in for.
They began with a massive bombing of Stalingrad. Bombs were exploding practically every few feet. They turned the city practically to dust. Everything was burning.
Only burning buildings remained in Stalingrad. There were almost no civilians left.
There was a disturbing smell as many bodies hadn't been removed. And the sounds, it was constant. Day and night, shooting, crying, screaming, throughout Stalingrad. It was a nightmare.
The Nazi pincers were within 15 miles of Stalingrad. Regardless of the cost, Stalingrad must be captured. Those were the German orders.
When we finally got into the city, it was going pretty well. At least in our division. Our division was the one that broke through on the 14th of September. We made it all the way to the Volga.
The Germans attacked dozens of times each day. By then, their tanks were attacking. Our trenches would shake from side to side. You couldn't lift up your head. When you looked up, there'd be a German right there. Our backs were against the wall.
It is very hard to say how each soldier reacts to their first moment of combat, when it all becomes real. I maintain there was no one my age, and I emphasize how old I was because we all feel invincible at that age. Who wasn't tremendously afraid.
I was hit by the smell of dried blood when I arrived at the hospital. It followed me everywhere. In the beginning, I worked in triage. We would hear the convoys of wounded getting nearer. They would come roaring up. During heavy battles, around 500 wounded would come through the hospital each day.
When I was on the front lines, I felt like this was the place for me. I got used to it. I wasn't afraid of anything. Quite the opposite. Often when we were under fire, my horse would start trembling. I used to hug the horse's neck and stroke it, saying, "Steady, steady."
On the last day of September, Hitler announced that the fall of the city was only a matter of a few days. Once more, the world was afraid a Russian campaign was lost.
Our army commander saw that we were at risk of being surrounded and destroyed. He told our division commander that when his main force retreated to the Volga, it would be up to our division to hold off the Germans and not let them advance. That meant our one division was to hold the front against two whole German armies.
That was when Stalin issued his order. It was known as "not one step back."
The Red Army created punishment units. They were armed with machine guns. If someone retreated, they opened fire on their own troops. Thus, discipline was restored.
Stalin had commanded, "The city that bears my name will not fall." And that other horrible dictator, Hitler, said, "A German soldier never retreats." The city found itself in a situation that was historically unprecedented. A battle between dictators had begun.
By the end of October, snow covered Stalingrad. From the air, the Germans tried to force the surrender of the Russian-held part of the city. At the same time, the battle of the streets continued.
About 3/4 of Stalingrad was now in the Germans' hands. We were holding on to the last quarter of Stalingrad.
The city was ablaze. Nothing was left, just ashes and the smell of burning. Often in battles there are sounds of shelling, bombing, guns firing. In Stalingrad, you couldn't hear anything because of the constant hum. You felt you were inside a meat grinder. Whole battalions went in, never to return.
Attention there, military history enthusiasts. Brace yourself for an unparalleled journey into the heart of warfare with History Hit, where the untold stories of desperate battles come to life. Join James Holland on a gripping road trip through Italy in Road to Victory, Italy 1943, uncovering the often overlooked campaign of the British 8th Army's landing and advance up the Italian peninsula in 1943. Next, explore the forgotten battlefields of the First World War with Alex Churchill, tracing the bloody battles that unfolded before the trenches, revealing the clash of modern weapons and Napoleonic tactics in a conflict that set the stage for the Great War. And finally, follow the one and only Rishi Sharma in Untold Stories of World War II as he raced against time to capture over 2,200 personal oral histories from living combat veterans, preserving the harrowing accounts of those who lived at the bleeding edge on the front line. Discover hundreds of hours of award-winning documentaries and ad-free podcasts with History Hit. Sign up for a special offer via the link in the description.
We had thought that our infantry, in the course of a few days, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, could take the city. But that's when the terrible house-to-house battles began. We just didn't expect that.
There was fighting for every house, every floor. We did not retreat.
For each soldier, for both the Russians and for us, it became this deadly question. Are you going to die, or am I?
I remember a patient with a chest wound. He cries, "Nurse, air, air." How can I give him air? What air? He's suffocating. We didn't have the tools to help him. We couldn't save him.
The illusion that we might win faded as house-to-house combat became unbearable. In terms of house-to-house combat, the Russians were unquestionably superior to us. They could hold out for longer. Russians didn't give up quickly or surrender in a hurry.
The person in charge of the operation was Zhukov. He was a serious strategist, very smart. He decided to encircle the German armies. His plan was this. 3 fronts had to push in from separate directions, surround and destroy them. The opinion of the Soviet people was, myself included, that the Germans were behaving in an inhuman way and must be destroyed.
Two simultaneous attacks were launched, one from the north, one from the south. The German armies encircling Stalingrad were now themselves threatened with encirclement.
The enemy positions were dealt a massive blow. For 1 whole hour we shelled them. We used about 3,500 artillery pieces on all 3 fronts. We were firing unceasingly, without a break. Our Air Force was bombing as well. After fighting our way through, we locked the circle. The Germans were trapped inside the pocket.
The Russian tactic worked. They had us trapped. We were totally surrounded. Now it got damn serious. From that point on, the fighting was so tough, it defies description. I can't overstate how cold it was. 20, 25, sometimes 30 degrees below zero.
Our divisional commander sought death. As defeat was becoming more likely, he actually took a weapon into his hands and shot at the Russians. Until he got lucky and was shot in the head, so he died instantly. That's another way out. My other superiors in the regiment, when it was coming to an end, they got drunk on schnapps and shot themselves.
The Germans were retreating, and we advanced in a column formation. And we received orders to stop and rest a bit. I found a place to lie down. I used my coat for a bed. My horse was standing near me. Later, I opened my eyes to see my horse expiring. It was dying because it was starving. When we were on the offensive, we didn't receive a regular fodder supply. I had to take off the straw that was left of a peasant's roof to feed the horse. But the horse couldn't take it anymore. The soldiers didn't waste the horse. They'd cut it up, boil and eat the meat. Horse meat.
They were shelling us with cluster munitions, and a round threw me over onto my back. I saw that the snow was bright red from my blood. Lung blood is always a very bright red. My master sergeant put a pistol in my hand and said, "Lieutenant, unfortunately, we can't take you with us. The Russians could be upon this bunker within the next half an hour." That was incredibly considerate. It would have allowed me to shoot myself. But miraculously, that night, there was a plane departing. My master sergeant, he threw me, the young lad, on his shoulder and got me on that plane. And that's how I made it out of that cauldron. I need a moment.
Stalingrad is free. The Nazis had capitulated.
After we surrounded them, the German command surrendered.
When they announced that the fighting at Stalingrad was over, we came out of the tent, and all around us were destroyed tanks, cannons, everything. We could still hear isolated machine guns firing here and there. The Germans that remained were hiding. They hid behind tanks, behind vehicles, and you'd hear automatic gun firing there and over there. Our soldiers were finishing the Germans off, shooting them. We'd say, "There goes another German." We weren't sorry.
Have you heard of the Battle of Stalingrad? It was the turning point in that war. I think it was.
We made it all the way to Berlin. That was the outcome. When it was over, our division commander and all the officers gathered. We drank quite a bit. It was beautiful. We sang, "Let's drink to the company commanders. Let's drink and pour again." We won, and that was the best feeling. And to keep your legs, your arms to be alive after the war.
Мужчины, предлагаю выпить стоя.
При Балтии кончилась война.
Suddenly they announced that the war is over.
Мы там стояли в госпитале.
Anyone with a firearm was shooting, saluting, firing.
Кончилась война.
But at the same time, along with joy, the morning light came. When they announced that the fighting was over, we went to the graves, where we buried our dead. Lilacs were in bloom. We broke the branches and laid them on the graves.
И мы пошли.
They didn't live to see victory.
Уже хоронили своих раненых. Мы пришли.
If only they had a few more days, a few more hours. They died without seeing the end of the war. It appears there was joy, but at the same time, there wasn't any joy. There was no joy.
Не было радости. Все было печально.
It's a funny thing, you know, I can watch a war picture, and yet when I see some of these films where some guy pops up with a gun and points it in somebody's face, I can't stand it. I just shut it off.
I still see things that I close my eyes and just see pictures. It's like a movie.
I don't care how many films you make, you're not going to come near describing war, because war is something by itself. Unless you experience it, you don't know it.
The forces of liberation move to their rendezvous with destiny. The landings are on.
Everything is just so noisy. When shells started landing and things were blowing up, you realized then it was for real.
There were hell breaking loose everywhere. We had battleships firing in. We had artillery on barges, firing over the top of us. Then we had the Germans firing at us too.
It was very busy. The Germans were shelling and blowing up the crafts in the water, and guys were floating around dead, and their bodies all over the place. For me, that was the most scary part, when that door dropped down.
When it was my turn, I was kind of very hesitant to move. The corporal had to holler at me a couple of times before I could move. I was just petrified. Finally got up and stepped over and jumped off into the water.
When the ramps come down to let these guys off the boat and to get out of the beach, they're running into machine gun fire. Well, that guy got killed that way. Once we hit the beach, that's when we really had lots of trouble. And it was quite a tricky business to get around that type of fire.
They had lots of time to shoot at us. I remember, as plain as it was yesterday, the sand moving in front of us where bullets were heading.
One of the lads got hit, and he was lying there calling for help. We couldn't stop to help him, because if we had, we would have lost some more of our own men. It was a hard decision to make and leave them there.
Now, what was 12 Platoon's particular objective on the beach?
It was to clean out that gun emplacement.
Did any of them surrender?
No. We didn't even give them a chance. At the time, they said that we had no place to put prisoners. You just had to dispose of them. That was it, because if they took prisoners, we had no place, no impoundment or anything. So, and our job was just to clean out anything that was on the beach and move on.
The company was about 120 men. We hit the beach. I think there was around 40 left standing.
Company got knocked right out. I was one of the lucky ones, I guess.
The vaunted West Wall crumbled before our whirlwind advance. The citizen soldiers of yesterday are now a hardened mass of professional killers. They have learned and improved on the lessons of Dieppe. They may now master the roads that lead the way to Berlin.
In view of the fact we had a few thousand miles to go before the end of the war, it was a kind of a dummy prize. And you won the first day, and you've only got another 2 years to go. And you win.
Our target was to get inland. The first thing I saw when we got into this little town was 3 Germans laying there. Obviously, they'd been hit by a shell or something or other. And one of them had his head off, and that made an impression.
He had his head off?
Yeah, his head was missing. So I figured, well, this is what war is like. So that was the first impression I had.
It took us an hour to get off the beaches. We got into a traffic jam. The streets were not wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass one another, I don't think.
And when the 2 regiments came in, the town just erupted. It was full of people.
There was a lot of people glad to see us. They come out and met us as we were coming in on the roads and whatnot, wanting to shake your hand. Most of us couldn't speak the language, but we knew enough to know that they were glad to see us.
A little boy climbed up my tank and gave me a bottle of wine. He was about 10 or 12. His father put him up in my tank and gave me a bottle of wine.
J'ai grimpé sur le premier char, et c'était McCormick. Enfin, je ne connaissais pas, bien entendu. Hein, je lui ai donné la bouteille de vin.
Up came a big glass of Calvados. I downed it with 1 gulp.
Felt good. Felt good.
Mon meilleur souvenir, je vous l'ai dit, moi, c'est l'arrivée l'arrivée des Canadiens, des Anglais, quoi, l'arrivée des libérateurs, quoi. Et puis, quand même, cette image, Canada. J'ai pleuré, non. Ah oui, j'ai pleuré, j'avais les larmes aux yeux de voir... pour moi, Canada, c'était fabuleux, quoi. Et c'est toujours resté comme ça chez nous.
Well, we got in about 5 or 6 miles at the first night. As far as we knew, we were the first to reach our objective.
Now, how does that compare to the Americans at Utah and Omaha and the British at Lion and Sword?
As far as we understand, we've reached the furthest of any other Allied formation on D-Day. We reached our objectives way ahead of the rest.
By the night of D-Day, this brigade of Western Canadians is the only one to take all of its objectives. But their salient is now exposed to the vicious guns of the SS. If they fail to hold it, the whole D-Day beachhead is at risk.
We were exposed quite a bit ahead of the rest of the group.
Why is it dangerous to be out there?
Because if we had nobody to support us, they could surround us. If the Germans got to the beach, they could have worked their way each way and folded up. They could have gone to the left and right and kept going and wiped out people along the beach.
They were directed to cut us off, as they put it, to Dunkirk us. In other words, push us back into the channel.
The German stormtroops include the 12th SS Youth Division, a formation of cunning and ferocious young Germans who've been indoctrinated since childhood with the most fanatic Nazism, and with only one idea: to fight like devils and throw us back into the sea.
Wir waren also mit der 12. Division, die Hitlerjugend, die war also eine besondere, ja, von der Motivation her. Muss man sagen, heute sagt man fanatisch.
Kirkmeyer and his 12 SS, they were a very young bunch and so conditioned that they figured they were invincible.
Kurt Meyer, der war ja bei uns als Panzermeyer bekannt. Panzermeyer war ein Typ, sagen wir mal, von Haut drauf.
Very good troops. A lot of them were battle hardened over in Russia, so they know what they're doing.
Und am 7. Juni kamen dann die ersten Panzer. Die mussten also rund 150 Kilometer fahren bis zur Front. Und dann begannen dann die Kämpfe bei Bretteville.
The Reginas got beyond their objective northwest of Caen. They are there today, and they mean to stay.
And where was Bretteville? Why was it important?
The 12th SS was trying to create a corridor to get back to the beach. Germans were trying to dislodge us, trying to drive us back to the beach.
I was sitting in the main street of Bretteville, and my squadron commander said, "Take a look, there's something going on out there." And I went down out a laneway and swung around a corner, and there were 5 Panzers coming right at me.
They were something to behold.
Scary.
Oh, boy.
And somebody started to holler, "The Germans are coming, the Germans are coming."
Fortunately, one of our 3rd troop with 17-pounders was further down the road, and he knocked the whole 5 of them out.
But how could he hit 5 that quickly? Why wouldn't one of the Panzers swing its gun round and hit him?
He didn't have time. He was down the field hitting them from the side, bang, 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 bang.
But there wasn't very many infantry that first attack. I guess they figured we'd just throw up our arms and give in. But the Regina rifles are called Farmer Johns. Farmers never give up. And that's why I guess we stayed there and weren't going to be defeated or die in the attempt.
Today, the infantry fought off those tanks and won. It was heroic fighting by new men. The Nazis are poised for another attack, but these Western Canadians know that the entire D-Day invasion depends on their holding their position. The Germans were told that they must push the Canadians back or die. They obeyed that order.
There was a counterattack on the Regina Rifles to the left of where I was.
By this time, they knew that they were in for a good fight.
We started to get shelled.
The shell fire was pretty heavy. They hit me, they hit my turret. It killed my gunner and my loader operator, and the men from my other tank were crawling over, and I said, just get the hell out of here. Just leave me. That's an order. And they just got on either side of me and started to pull me through the wheat. I don't know why I didn't bleed to death, but I didn't. I just didn't have anything vital. Did a lot of damage, and I lost my leg.
There was a little guy, Ruppel was his name. He was laying there and kind of groaning, and we rolled him over, and his clothes next to his stomach was split wide open. We could see his intestine, some of his intestines there, but there was very little bleeding because I think the thing was that the metal that cut him through was so hot it sort of seared the blood vessels and stuff.
The German tanks crashed back and forth past our slit trenches and destroyed many of our guns. They sprayed the Canadians with steel and fire. In a melee of confusion, they even penetrated our positions.
When the tanks come in on our left-hand side and come down into Bretteville, they surrounded the headquarters at Bretteville.
Bei einem Panzerangriff kanadische Soldaten versucht haben, die Panzer zu knacken, indem die auf die Panzer aufgesprungen sind, haben versucht, die Turmluke zu öffnen. Das ist leider für die Kanadier schlecht ausgegangen, denn die Panzer haben ja sind auf Deckung gefahren.
One young lad got hit, and I tried to stop the bleeding. And the last 3 words he said, "I want my mom." He said it 3 times, and the last time, because of the noise of the shelling, you could hardly hear it. And after dark, I had to take him away and bury him.
Ich habe festgestellt, dass eigentlich die Kanadier die zähesten Kämpfer waren während der ganzen Invasion. Wir haben also die Kanadier echt als starke Kämpfer betrachtet.
As long as the Reginas had any ammunition, they wouldn't give up. Even then, I think if they had a chance, they'd use their bayonets.
These boys knocked out 29 Panther and Tiger tanks, bigger than anything we've got, and they never retreated. Monty said, "Stake out a claim and hold it." They've done it. Our beachhead in Normandy is secure.
When I come out in the morning, it was a mess. There was a hand laying there, an arm laying there. This little girl walking down, pushing a baby buggy. And she had one one little one in that. She had another one by the hand. And they were walking, covered in blood. And they were just out of it. I tried to talk to them, but you couldn't. They're just blank. I'll never forget Brettville.
Wenn man überlegt, wir hatten 36 Mann im Zug und wie ich verwundet wurde, waren wir nur noch zu sechst. Die anderen waren tot, verwundet oder vermisst.
How did you feel when that ended after a couple of days?
Well, I certainly felt elated about it, you know. After all, we had beat these bastards back.
I had a lot of good friends right there then that got shot. A lot of our fellows were taken prisoner, taken to this, what they call the Abbey, that's where Cartmire was, and they marched them out in the yard and shot them.
Some people got away. There's a field where they're lined up, and there's quite a number there, and two people said, it looks like they're going to shoot us, because they had the machine guns up. This is all prisoners of war. So they took off into the grain field, and the firing began, and they murdered a lot of the POWs. Some were Brits, and a lot of them were Winnipeg Rifles. The Germans murdered 58 of our guys, you know, 58. I mean, they were captured. It wasn't a heat of battle, they were captured.
Sometimes you wonder how some of these guys ever made it through. Well, I was in the hospital at Colchester, and this little guy, I see him coming across the little square, Parade Square, I guess you'd call it, and he was all bent over. And I went over to talk to him because he was going fairly slow. And this was a little Rumpel. And we didn't expect him to live. And he said, well, tomorrow I'm going home.
We're glad he lived.
Yeah, it was really something to see that he survived.
We have taken the beachhead, and the Germans are not going to push us back into the sea. But the foothold is small, and the Hun is still strong and ferocious. Hitler will not yield the rest of Normandy or France or indeed Europe without a fight. But we will give him that fight, and we will win it.